So this video, I'm just gonna call it, freestyle. Before I really record any video, I always ask God to speak through me every video. It is my own experience, my own wisdom, but He speaks through me to align the words perfectly. And another little secret, if I go to a 12-step meeting, I'm going into that bathroom and I'm asking God to speak through me to say anything that anybody needs to hear. So then after that meeting, people will tear up and be like, thanks for sharing that, Trent. Wow, so when you've really devoted everything to God as I have, He speaks through me to other people sometimes. That's communication right there, so I wanted to share, so a lot of people in AA, they think it's recovering, there is a recovering phase, but there's gotta be this latch, like this click in the mind, that say, oh, I'm recovered. What does that really mean? How does somebody become recovered of a hopeless state of mind and body? In my own opinion, spiritual help is required to become recovered. Spiritual experiences, they're not just about quitting addiction, or whatever. It's about solving your life problem. A spiritual experience, when somebody has one, you may be reading something, you may be having some kind of huge emotional displacement. And in that moment, that breath, all fears fall from you. You feel the nearness of your Creator, The mind becomes quiet, to a point where if the person allows it, God will speak to them, And that's the most conscious contact you can really have. Some things that God's told me, and as I really wholeheartedly say, I do not care who doesn't believe this stuff, I don't, and that's, and recovered, also, it's not just being recovered from addiction, it's being recovered from life itself, what other people think, am I enough for this person, am I enough for me, all these thought patterns that really just become devoid into bliss. So a spiritual experience, what does that do? That quiets the mind, right? You are not your mind, so it quiets the mind and the body. So a spiritual experience, that equals enlightenment, right? So you're enlightened, your mind's quiet. While the enlightened person may have some thinking, their thoughts are usually just happy, peaceful thoughts, about, for me, it can just be like, man, I am so grateful to have nice clothes. I'm so grateful to even be able to do laundry. I'm so grateful to just be able to, relax and take it easy, really. And that's the blessing right there. So while the enlightened person's always focus is in the now, in the present moment, what they know is the future doesn't exist, and if you really live in the present moment is the biggest key to a spiritual realm, what I mean? Like that's you're grabbing, spiritual experience puts you in the now, you have enough of them, it begins to stick to you, and you continue to enlarge it through more, because quite frankly, I'm pretty freaking hooked on the spiritual experience feeling. So that spiritual experience equals enlightenment, so what does enlightenment mean? It means recovered from life itself. Even if if you've accepted spiritual help and you've had spiritual experiences, you know, they can recover you from depression, you know, anxiety, worry, you know, all of that stuff. You know, it can help you to realize that everything is always as it is meant to be. And if things were meant to be different, they would be. You know, a lot of people about sobriety is they really think it's more about the quantity of time. No, it's more about the quality of sobriety rather than the quantity, you know. So a lot of people, I hope it doesn't start raining. If it does, it's alright. Just a little drizzle will be alright. So people will think, you know, it's more about my quantity with God, you know, but no, it's actually more about your quality time with God, you know, because if you're anything like me, you've enlarged that connection every day, you know, to a point where, I mean, it's like a full-on, you know, thing, you know. It's you know, how do I fall asleep? You know, I struggle with sleeping, you know. I have a little bit of what they call like perma tweak. It's gotten better, you know. That's where that synthetic energy latches to your body even months or maybe even years after stopping, you know. So to fall asleep, God speaks to me for me to fall asleep, you know. Really, I mean, he'll talk to me in my mind, comfort me, you know, say nice good things to me, you know, and I'll fall asleep 10 minutes flat. Really, it's a pretty freaking it's very gratitude, you know, based. So another thing God really is told me, you know, and this is some truth of anything, you know, is a lot of people, you know, they'll focus on other people's actions, you know, they'll take it personally, they'll focus on what they're doing, they'll get mad about what they're doing. You know, what that person doesn't realize is the only being that exists for your own eyes is you. You know, the only actions you should ever focus on are your own, because those are the only actions that you make for your own eyes. Never to worry about anybody else's actions, because your being of your own story is the only story that exists in your own eyes, you know. So not too long ago at my dad's house, I had asked God, you know, why is the world the way it is? You know, why is it like this? You know, so really the only way for there to be world peace is if the whole world gave their lives to God, you know. And that takes, I know there's people out there that you know, you find God the moment you realize you don't need to seek God, because he's actually been there the entire time, really. So people have given their lives to God without finding themselves hopeless, you know, like I did. A few friends of mine have, you know. So the whole world would have to give their lives to God and do as I have done to have world peace, you know. And how do I maintain? So anybody can practice this, you know. Anybody can practice this. The only thing anybody really should be praying for is not strength, endurance, patience, you know, because all of those things come just from these three things in a prayer, okay? This is what you do. You say, please God, reign your peace, serenity, and enlightenment throughout my mind, body, soul, and spirit. Amen. You say that prayer, you know, if you got the faith and surrender, you say that. Maybe about 30 minutes to an hour there, you're going to start to feel a little different. You know, you're going to start to feel utterly relaxed. Your mind's quiet, right? The free banger of three of the most important things for anybody in the world to have at one time, which is what I have at one time every single day by just doing that. You know, really, I have it right now. I feel that right now. So throughout the day, you know, you continue to thank God for doing that, and you just simply ask him to keep it reigned over you every hour or 2 or 3, 4 hours, you know. If you don't got time to do the whole prayer with these, you know, like I do it, just say it in your head, you know. If you want God to speak to you, he will. You know, you just sit down and you know, if you let him in, you know, he will speak to you, and you know, that's a true blessing right there. I mean, really, God's told me he's with me more than anybody else in the world. You know, he told me he's grateful to have conscious contact with me, you know, just as much as I am with him. You know, so as what I know, you know, is I'm going to record a video soon with the big book. You know, I'm going to whip out the strap again soon, very soon. You know, but I can talk about some of my own spiritual. So the first time I ever read that paragraph in Into Action, we feel the nearness of our Creator, you know, all fears. I had about 3 weeks to a month sober. You know, I read that. And I was living that paragraph before I read it, you know, and as I read it, I had this insane spiritual experience awakening. You know, I was actually shaking, you know, and I took a walk outside. And I started playing the song With Arms Wide Open by Cruz, you know, and I really felt like God had welcomed me with arms wide open. You know, so on the walk back, you know, this other song, it's called Spectre by Bad Omens. And I was listening to it, I want to change it, you know, and God spoke to me in the moment. He said, don't change it. And so about 30 minutes before that moment, I had come across a bottle of Corona beer, recorded myself dumping it out and smashing it on the ground. Now, I've spent a very substantial amount of my life hooked on alcohol, you know, so within 1 month of spiritual experience, spiritual enlightenment, I had become recovered, and I could do that. That's how you know it works. It really does. So the lyrics in that song read, do you feel love? You know? And as those lyrics went through these exact headphones, in this exact town, I heard the lyrics, do you feel love? You know, and I could feel God's love being rained over me. And as those lyrics read, do you feel love? I pictured my whole entire life of alcohol. Every moment, anytime I talk about, you know, any of my past, you know, stuff, I'm going to end up cursing. Because it was bad. I mean, I had a really fucking I had a really bad past. You know, it was really bad. Just give me a second. There's just somebody walking by. I always keep my eyes open because much people have asked me if I have clear out here or if I want any. I don't give a whatever. So, I don't want any of that goofy. I was goofy for a long time, and I was really goofy, actually. Really freaking goofy. You know, but that was a spiritual experience right there, you know, with God speaking to me. You know, so that's a little story right there for you, you know, is that. And these kinds of experiences, you know, they changed my whole outlook and perspective upon life. I noticed it every time I had one. I went to sleep, woke up the next day, I felt more calm, more patient, more collected, more happy. You know, with having enough of them, you know, love and tolerance of others is my code. You know, I live that book. You know, I absolutely do. You know, so that's really just my little spiel, you know, just that. You know, I'm gonna leave it at that. You know, it's just some knowledge stuff, wisdom, you know, whatever you want to think about it, but you may have learned a lot with what I just talked about. I pass.